Good morning. My name is John Marsh. I serve as the interim minister of the Unitarian Universalist Society of New Haven. I welcome you all to our Sunday service. Wherever you find yourself on life's journey, I hope you find messages of comfort and healing and challenge here. Out of all the things in the world you could be doing right now, you chose to spend this time with this congregation, gathered by necessity electronically this morning, but made up of very real people. I am so glad you made it this far. This is a congregation that believes that Black lives matter, that every person has the right to affirm their own gender identity, that all people are inherently worthy. We acknowledge that our sanctuary sits on the land that is traditionally that of the Quinnipiac Nation. As a congregation, we strive to heal the wounds of the past and the present in the ongoing work of reconciliation. We seek to connect and serve in the sacred hope that we might grow the sum total of love and justice in our world. Please join me in the words for the lighting of our chalice, symbol of the Unitarian Universalist faith. Please join me in the words for the lighting of our chalice. In a time of uncertainty, when everything around us is changing constantly, each day, new developments, rising numbers, changing guidelines, we light our chalice to remind ourselves of our grounding in our values. We remember that the flaming chalice came into being as a beacon of hope during World War II, a secret symbol that offered help. May it remind us of our power as a community. May it remind us that when we look out for the most vulnerable amongst us, we all benefit. Please join me and the Shroth Duma family in singing together, O Day of Light and Gladness.
Of prophecy
Let me say a few things about this morning's service. If you're watching on Zoom and are having trouble with either the audio or the visual, you might be better off if you watched it from the YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and in the YouTube search engine, enter USNH Chalice Connections. That's USNH Chalice Connections. If you go there, you'll have your choice from 4 or 5 videos. Look for the one with today's date on it, and you'll be there. Another thing about this morning's service is that this is the point where we usually have a story for all ages. This week is different. For one thing, Jesse Greist, our Director of Religious Education, spent the week not working on a story, but carefully using gloves and disinfectant, assembling Easter egg packages for all of the children in our congregation. The packet contained not only chocolate eggs, but also special messages. And I invite everyone who received one of those messages, if they are willing, in the coffee hour following the service, to share with everyone the messages that you received in that packet. So we don't have a story for all ages this morning, but we do have a sermon which I worked on with videographer Wes Stover to produce something that has more bells and whistles than most sermons. Finally, following this morning's service, there will be a very special message from the candidate to be the next called minister of this congregation. So please stay after the postlude for that very special message. I mentioned earlier that this is a congregation that works to increase the sum total of love and justice in our world. This is ongoing work that takes us in many different directions. Next, board member Craig Machado will talk to us about one of those directions.
Good morning. This is Craig Machado, and I'm speaking to you today on behalf of the Welcoming Congregation LGBTQ Social Justice Task Force. That is a mouthful, but that pretty much describes what we're doing. My pronouns are he and him. And I wanted to give you a little history today of what's been going on in USNH in terms of LGBTQ issues and the larger society, because there is a lot happening. As you may know, USNH became a welcoming congregation in 1994 after a process of discernment and a vote. And even for liberal UUs, there were a few people in the congregation at the time who left USNH because of the vote in favor of welcoming congregation status. So it wasn't unanimous, but it overwhelmingly passed, and that was a good thing. And then in 2004, some of you may recall we had a special worship service designed to renew the congregation's original commitment to LGBTQ members and to be supportive of actions regarding discrimination and bias in the community at large. And there were a lot of other things going on in terms of legal issues as well. In the early 2000s, for example, the Supreme Court came down with 2 rulings. The first one rejected the criminalization of same-sexual relations, and also threw out a Colorado state initiative which sought to single out LGBTQ persons as undeserving of any state protection in areas of employment, public accommodation, hospital visitations, etc. Those were pretty big decisions, and they affected a lot of people. And at USNH, our minister at the time, Kathleen Mateague, was a strong advocate for LGBTQ equality. And again, many of you may remember she made a pledge not to marry anybody unless the state of Connecticut passed marriage equality, which was ultimately granted by the state Supreme Court. And McTeague went on to officiate at several same-sex weddings, including that of Linda Bray and Carol Arnold from our congregation. And Kathleen was a great advocate for this cause. Of course, 2015, there was a momentous decision in the Supreme Court, ruled in favor of marriage equality, regardless of sexual orientation. And this basically eviscerated state and local bans against same-sex marriage. There was an incredible amount of celebration. It was a wonderful time. There was a great sigh of relief. And a feeling, I think, by a lot of people, this is a defining battle for LGBTQ rights. However, we know that that's not exactly true. The struggle goes on. And right now, USNH is going through this welcoming congregation renewal process, which has been spearheaded largely by Maggie Goodwin. And there's also, in the area of transgender discrimination and empowerment, a test case before the Supreme Court, which actually is going to look at whether or not Title IX, which covers discrimination on the basis of sex, can be enlarged or reinterpreted to include gender or gender expression or sexual orientation, or how you identify that way. That's going to be a very important case. Also, we're working on the Welcoming Congregation video module. You may have participated in that, and I encourage you to do so if you haven't. There's information on that through the newsletter. And that module is dealing mostly with transgender persons. In addition to the Title IX case, there's another case before the Supreme Court, which has to do with religious beliefs. And this is particularly disturbing because basically the argument is that a business or any entity serving the public can refuse to provide service to LGBTQ people. In other words, based on a religious belief. And there are a couple of cases here that are bringing this to the forefront. One involves the firing of a transgender person. I believe it was in Michigan. She worked at a funeral home, and when she disclosed her trans personhood, she was fired and told that it's not appropriate, or they didn't want her in her new capacity. And of course, you probably remember the bakery in Colorado that refused to make a wedding cake for a gay couple because their Christian beliefs, it didn't jive with those beliefs. So both this case, the one on Title IX, and this one are also going to be heard by the Supreme Court, and it's going to be very interesting to watch what happens. So a lot of progress has been made nationally and actually in the area of religion and churches at USNH. So there's still a lot of work to do. So we want to ask you to support the Welcoming Congregation Renewal Program in any way you can, and look for other opportunities through the task force in the coming months. I also might mention that we have done some other things. We had a vigil last year for mostly trans people who were murdered. We've had some other events, discussions. There's going to be a book club discussion on Zoom of a new book by a man who's transgender, who's a woman who transitioned to a man and wrote a very interesting book. And we'll be talking about that on April 19th. Also, just before I let you go, if you're interested in trans issues and you have Netflix or Amazon Prime, there are a couple of series that I would recommend. The first one is Pose, which is on Netflix. This is really a wonderful show, first season. It focuses on drag balls, or what they call voguing, which is really big in the 80s and 90s, when people dress up and they win awards and they're judged for their appearance. And this series follows several people who are in that, but it's also very interesting because it focuses on these houses of support that were actually created for LGBTQ people who were kicked out of their homes because of their sexual orientation or gender. Another show which was on Amazon Prime is Transparent. A lot of you may have seen this already. If you haven't, it's a very good series. It follows a Jewish family in LA. The father is transitioning to become a woman, and his children have various issues and interests and proclivities with their own sexuality. It's funny, it's eventful, it's tumultuous, it's a great show, and it gives you a really good look at what's going on in the transgender world today. So I want to thank you for your time, and please check out upcoming events with the Welcoming Congregation LGBTQ Task Force. Thank you.
During this time of pandemic, the Pastoral Care Team and the Covenantal Relations Committee are there to hear people's concerns and sometimes offer concrete assistance. You can reach them through our congregation's webpage. Each week, we note some of the joys and sorrows that sit with members of this congregation. This week, we offer a special welcome to baby Simone Brown, who was born on Thursday to parents Stephanie Fakardzadeh and Matt Brown. Emily McCabe writes, "Please keep my sister in your thoughts and prayers as she was in the hospital this week. She is 35 weeks pregnant with twins and has borderline pre-eclampsia. It's very difficult for Emily not to be with her sister, who is in Wisconsin." Our thoughts are with June Schaefer, who is in the hospital right now under observation. We hope that she will be released soon. From Rich and Carol Stockton, a joy that their daughter-in-law Sherry is recovering from COVID-19 after 2 weeks of infection. Sherry is a doctor working in the Bronx. John Deming has let us know that his brother George continues to be hospitalized with COVID-19. He seems to be doing all right, and we are hoping for a full recovery. From Eva Betjeman, asking thoughts and prayers for her sister-in-law's mother, Eileen Knight, who is fighting both breast cancer and COVID-19. Becky Friedkin and David Jones are sad to report that a dear family friend, Ted Empel, died this week. Ted died peacefully with his family around him. Please hold Becky, David, and Ted's family in your hearts. Finally, sorrowfully, Helene Goward, also hospitalized with COVID-19, has been put on morphine comfort care. Her husband, Bill, says that she has, in essence, left us already, and that it is good to know she is not experiencing any pain. I spoke with Bill on Friday. He had nothing but praise for the physicians attending Helene and said that he was being well supported by his children and by members of this congregation. We'll now have a meditation in 3 parts: the spoken word, silence, and a musical response. We're blessed to live in a part of the world that right now is alive with flowers and blossoming trees. The spoken word will be A.E. Hausman's Loveliest of Trees. Loveliest of trees, the cherry now, is hung with bloom along the bough, and stands about the woodland ride, wearing white for Eastertide. Now, of my 70 years, 20 will not come again, and take from 70 springs a score, that only leaves me 50 more. And since to look at things in bloom, 50 springs are little room, about the woodlands I will go to see the cherry hung with snow.
Good morning. I'm Joni Messner, and I've been asked to read a stewardship testimonial on behalf of Christina Allen, who apparently, according to her husband Derek, has been running around working like crazy in the emergency room at the VA hospital. So here's her testimonial. Good morning. I'm Christina Allen. Not really. I've been a member here for almost 3 years and currently serve on the Ministerial Search Committee. This morning I'll be offering my thoughts on the importance of the intersection between faith and financial stewardship. If we build a system with the most marginalized people in mind first, the system will work for everyone. I came across this quote somewhere in the depths of the internet a while back, and although it comes to mind often, I can't recollect the source. On the surface, this sounds so obvious, so simple, yet so brilliant. But our reality could not be further from this. Systems in this country are not designed this way, resulting in vicious cycles of poverty, homelessness, addiction, and a multitude of other oppressions. In my professional life, I've seen this play out in front of my eyes while struggling to provide access and support equity in healthcare during a global pandemic. Our healthcare system works for those who can afford it, ensuring rapid testing and treatment for some, while others are told to stay away until they're gasping for breath. At this point, you may be wondering when or if I'll be providing a stewardship testimonial, but I promise it's in here. I truly believe deeply that this congregation understands what it means to build a system with the most marginalized in mind. That, although money makes the world go round, this community and our social justice work is about so much more than charity. This is why I give. I don't know the price of belonging to a community that keeps you anchored in what you believe in and believes in you. But until I figure it out, I'll keep giving with this in mind. Thank you.
This congregation is coming to the end of its annual stewardship campaign at a time when it seems very risky to commit to anything, let alone support of a religious institution. But for many of us, this congregation is needed now more than ever. This is not a congregation that is urging you to gather for an Easter service so that Jesus can protect you from COVID-19 with the breath of life. No, this is a congregation that asks you to think carefully about what it is you want to put up on your mirror to memorize while you are washing your hands. If you are experiencing some difficulty about that, email me and I'll send you some suggestions. I ask you to look with me at this chart. It's a chart that indicates the percentage of the congregation that has pledged so far. I want to thank the 65% of the people who have taken the leap. I ask the remaining 35% to add your fuel to this flame and make it burn higher and stronger. We know that not everyone in the congregation will be able to give as much as they did last year. We are asking you to make a pledge anyway. Every gift counts, and every pledge is an act of solidarity with the other people here. We also know that some people here are receiving steady incomes and that your expenses are reduced. We ask that you, if possible, give more to help cover the loss from those who must give less. Finally, if we are only for ourselves, who are we really for? We ask that you extend your generosity beyond the needs of this congregation into the community. This pandemic has created a whole new set of needs for the survival of those people who are served by Columbus House, people in this area who would be living on the streets if it were not for the work of Columbus House. This congregation has a long history of supporting Columbus House, and we can assure you that this is a group of people who make every dollar that is given to them work double. In a moment, we will hear a movement from Debussy's Concerto in A for violin and piano. I ask you to please consider using this moment to open a second window on your browser. Go to this congregation's website. Make a pledge if you have not done so already. Or put a gift in our electronic offering plate. Or click on to the link for Columbus House and make a gift there. Thank you. Last week, I talked about the events of Palm Sunday as being gritty, almost too real. I said that Easter was a kind of fairy tale ending to that story, and perhaps not what was wanted at that moment. Well, now the moment is Easter, and I want to speak in favor of fairy tales and endings that hold out the possibility of happy ever after, or at least, and if nothing else has happened to them, they may still be living right there. I am going to let J.R.R. Tolkien make the case, a reading from words he wrote about fairy tales and fantasy and escape. I have claimed that escape is one of the main functions of fairy stories. And since I do not disapprove of them, it is plain that I do not accept the tone of scorn or pity with which escape is now so often used. Why should one be scorned if, finding themselves in prison, they try to get out and go home? Or if they cannot do so, they think and talk about other topics than jailers and prison walls. Hi, I'm John Marsh. I love Harry Potter books. I am not afraid of theological reflection, literary criticism, or even combining those three things together. Okay, I know what you're asking yourself. You're asking, has anyone ever attempted anything like this before? How dangerous is it? Is this going to be like one of those videos where a guy tries to juggle chainsaws and then it goes horribly wrong? Even if it does involve, as Albus Dumbledore would say, leaving the firm foundation of fact and journeying together through the murky marshes of memory and into the thickets of wildest guesswork. I should have brought an umbrella. I'm going to be identifying Harry Potter as a Christ figure. One concern about that for some people is that this might somehow make him less original, even less appealing. I would argue the opposite. For some of us, it makes us more appealing, the series, and more original. Harry brings some fresh viewpoints into some old arguments. It's like this flower. It's beautiful, just to look at. And then you learn that its name is Love Lies Bleeding. For me, the flower becomes even more interesting. The flower is still the flower, the thing itself, and there are also other names for it that people have in other languages, but a group of people decided to call it Love Lies Bleeding. Certainly, this tells us more about those people than the flower itself, but I am a people or a person, and the name relates to human experience that I can understand, perhaps even gives me a fresh insight into my own experience. You asked me the question, has anyone ever done anything like this before? One of the great literary critics of all time was the Canadian Northrop Frye. Today, he's probably best remembered for being the doctoral advisor for Margaret Atwood's thesis, who later went on to write The Handmaid's Tale. True story, check it out. He also wrote a book about the Bible called The Great Code, indicating that for him, the Hebrew Scripture and the Christian Bible are like a DNA code that runs through all of Western literature. He talked about comedy and tragedy. He tells us that tragedy is about alienation and separation. Comedy is about the fulfillment of desire and ongoing life. The story of the Passion of Jesus Christ is comedy. Dante called it the Divine Comedy, not because it's funny, but because it ends in the fulfillment of desire. Now, what does Harry Potter desire most? We know this because in the very first book, Harry looks into the mirror of Erised. The mirror of Erised is a mystical mirror. According to Dumbledore, the mirror shows us the deepest, most desperate desire of our hearts. Harry, upon encountering the mirror, can see himself amongst a crowd of family. So, Harry Potter wants more than anything else to be a part of a loving family. At the end of the last book, does he get his desire? Yes. He is the father of 3 children, the godfather of at least one other, an uncle of many. He is a husband with a wife and has Mr. and Mrs. Weasley as father-in-law and mother-in-law. Incidentally, the other person we see looking into the mirror is Ron Weasley, who sees himself being recognized for his accomplishments. In the closing chapter of the stories, Ron declares laughingly that the crowd of people gathered around them are staring at him because, he says, I'm famous. Northrop Frye, citing the ancient philosopher Aristotle, tells us that it is the job of historians and scientists to tell us what really happened or what really happens. It is the job of poets and storytellers, people like J.K. Rowling, to tell us not what really happens, but what always happens. Let's unpack that statement. Historians tell us things that really happened, like when George Washington was first president of the United States. He did many wonderful things that set a good example for future presidents. However, he also kept slaves. His wife Martha had independent wealth, and she also kept slaves. When one of her slaves ran away to freedom, they tried hard to have her apprehended and brought back to them. They were not successful. The slave lived in freedom for the rest of her days. No one knows where. If a historian tells you something like this, and you are not sure if it really happened, you can consult different books. You can research primary sources who can verify or deny the story. You can make a judgment as to whether or not you are listening to a good historian. Scientists tell us things like what really happens when you combine Diet Coke with mint Mentos and get a big fizz, but when you combine Fruit Mentos with Diet Coke, not so much. You can test this yourself and check whether or not this really happens and decide if the scientists are good scientists. By the way, this is an experiment best performed outside, just saying. But what does it mean that a storyteller tells us not what really happens, but what always happens? Author J.K. Rowling tells us about wizards and witches who ride on broomsticks and have their messages delivered by owls. This is not what really happens to us in our world. Rowling also tells us of a world where mothers like Mrs. Weasley worry about their children and do everything they can to protect their children. Their children, instead of being grateful, complain that their mother is not letting them have enough responsibility and freedom to make their own decisions. Rowling tells us of a world where high school boys scruff up their hair in the middle of the day to make it look like they have just come off the sports field, so as to remind everyone of their athletic accomplishments. These are things that always happen. Now, let's talk about something truly magical. Northrop Frye tells us that among the most basic impulses for storytelling is the loss and regaining of identity. As the writer of an old hymn has it, I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. Unless something unfortunate happened very early in your life, there was a time when you were the most beautiful baby in the world, at least to the most important people in the world, the ones who were taking care of you. They smiled at you a lot, and when you were 4 to 6 weeks of age, you started smiling back. Then, at some point, life was not all smiles anymore. The world was not the way you wanted it to be. Simply crying because you were unhappy did not get people motivated to behave as you wished. So you started working to try to please your mom or your dad or your teacher or your boyfriend or your girlfriend or religious leader or your own sense of justice or beauty or truth-telling so that the world could be right again. Things did not always go as you had planned. You worked hard to please your boyfriend or your girlfriend, but they were not impressed. Or you worked very hard to make justice happen in the world, but justice did not happen. And then, here comes the magic part. Even though you did not get the results you set out to achieve, somehow your efforts were not wasted after all. Your sacrifice somehow paid off, either in making you new friends or helping you to become a better person, especially to the one person whose esteem you most desperately need, that person being yourself. Life, death, and then life again. Magic. This is the story pattern for the phoenix, for the ancient Egyptian god Osiris, the Greek legend Orpheus, the Christian God Jesus, and it is the story pattern for our own Harry Potter. Another part of this dangerous territory, once you develop an eye for spotting Christ figures, you start seeing them everywhere. Christopher Robin in Winnie the Pooh. Christopher is a name that is derived from Christ. The robin is a bird with a special place in Christian mythology. When Winnie the Pooh is in a spot of trouble, he calls out to Christopher to save him. And Christopher always does. What's more, Christopher often declares that he loves Pooh. We are saved, it seems, by being loved. At the end of the Pooh stories, Christopher goes through a transformation and leaves Pooh behind, but the reader is assured that there is something eternal about Christopher's love for Pooh. In C.S. Lewis's The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Aslan is such a stand-in for Christ that, for me, it detracts from the charm of the story. Having an all-powerful, all-knowing being who becomes very meek and willingly submits to being sacrificed just for the sake of others, it's not really part of my theology. I much prefer J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, the trilogy, which protects the mystery of the three-part Godhead by having it represented by three different characters. Frodo Baggins, who is humble, close to the ground, a common person type of person. Aragorn, who is the rightful king, although this is disguised at first. Gandalf, the knower of mysteries, who sacrifices himself and is transformed into an even greater and powerful way of knowing. Or take the character of Jean Valjean in Victor Hugo's Les Miserables. Jean Valjean has three incarnations within his one life. The prisoner, who, because of his circumstances, lives close to the ground, and because he is treated like a beast, he behaves like a beast. The mayor, the kingly figure, who brings a city to life. The resident of a convent, where life is spent in contemplation and praise of that which is eternal. Let's talk about scars. Scars are one of the telltale signs that a Christ figure is among us. I once read a play by William Shakespeare, and one of the characters used this exclamation. I thought it was pronounced zounds. I was wrong. It's zoons. It's an abbreviation of by God's wounds. And in this context, God's wounds means the wounds of Jesus of Nazareth, sometimes called Jesus Christ. So, what's the big deal about Christ's wounds? Turns out they are a big deal to a lot of people. They are the signs of Jesus' willingness to sacrifice himself. They are the signs of his love for humanity. The medieval theologian Thomas à Kempis wrote a book called The Imitation of Christ, and he talks about the invitation to us to rest in the wounds of Christ, to breathe free and easy, because through the wounds of Christ, the world is made safer, a whole place for us to be in. Even before Thomas wrote his book, some of the saints of the Roman Catholic Church had started imitating Christ in a curious way. It began with Francis of Assisi. An angel appeared to Francis, we are told, and blessed him by giving him the stigmata, identical wounds as those inflicted on Jesus during his crucifixion appeared on his body. This has become to be known as the ecstasy of St. Francis. Over the next centuries, hundreds more shared in this ecstasy. The fellow pictured here is a former car thief who converted to Christianity in prison. He had Christ's wounds tattooed on his body. He said, "Before, I had signs of a different gang tattooed on me. Now I'm in Christ's gang." Scars or wounds, especially on the forehead where Jesus was forced to wear a crown of thorns, or hands or legs where nails were driven through, are indicators of a character being a Christ figure. Does Harry Potter have a significant scar or scars or wounds? Well, yeah. First and foremost, there is the lightning-shaped scar on his forehead, the wound everybody wants to see, just as Jesus' companions, especially Thomas, wanted to see Jesus' wounds after the resurrection. Both Jesus' wounds and Harry's forehead scar indicate the time when extremely powerful people tried to kill them and failed. The time when they were supposed to die, but somehow didn't. Harry also carries a scar on the back of his right hand. This is where Dolores Umbridge tortured Harry by having him write out the sentence, "I must not tell lies," multiple times with a blood quill. Like the scar on Harry's forehead, this scar also flashes with pain at significant moments. Later, when Rufus Scrimgeour tries to recruit Harry to work for the Ministry of Magic, Harry shows him this scar as a symbol of the hypocrisy of the ministry. The Unitarian Universalist faith to which I belong long ago rejected the idea of resting in the wounds of Christ. It rejected the idea of a Father God who would require the sacrifice, the life of his Son, before sharing his love with humanity. Our position is rather like that of Professor Snape when Dumbledore informs him of the requirement of Harry to sacrifice himself. Osseo text. Snape looked horrified. "You have kept Harry alive so he can die at the right moment? Don't be shocked, Severus. How many men and women have you watched die?" "Lately, only those I could not save," said Snape. He stood up. "You have used me." "Meaning?" "I have spied for you and lied for you, put myself in mortal danger. Everything was supposed to be to keep Lily Potter's son safe. Now you tell me you have been raising him like a pig for slaughter. Without a sense of fun and imagination, we could easily end up in a church, like the one conjured by the character Hazel Notes in Flannery O'Connor's novel, Wise Blood. A worldview in which the blind don't see, the lame don't walk, and thems that are dead stays that way. Sadly, there are days when I feel like I belong to that church. There is, however, another path, a path discerned in a dream by Harry Potter, in which Albus Dumbledore remarks, "Of course it is happening inside your head, Harry, but why on earth should that mean it is not real?" Following this path can take us to so many places, including another image of suffering, sometimes hurled against us liberal types in derision, that of the bleeding heart. The image of the bleeding heart comes from both Jesus and his mother Mary. This is the Jesus and Mary who continually care about and therefore continually suffer for all of the people in the world. I don't expect that I will know the ecstasy of the stigmata anytime soon. But there have been moments in my life where I have felt a bond with all the human beings in the world, past, present, and future. A bond of both joy and suffering. I have wept tears for Harry Potter, and when at the Battle of Hogwarts, the Weasley family gathered around the dead body of George, I had to put the book down and walk around the house for a while before I could continue. And these are imaginary characters. And this connection with the joy and the suffering of others influences the decisions, the choices I make, which, according to Dumbledore, is what shows me who I truly am. It is only in the rarest of circumstances that we humans are required to sacrifice our lives so that others may live. What we are constantly being required to do is to live our lives in such a way that others may also enjoy life, or as one hymnist put it, to serve the common good and make our own days glad. Scars and wounds are symbols of pain, but they are also symbols of having lived and survived. How about you? Are there any scars on your body? What stories are associated with them? And what about the places your imagination takes you? Do these things influence the choices you make, which show you who you are? Finally, let's talk about Harry's death and resurrection. In Harry's death experience, he goes in his mind to the King's Cross railroad station. In this scene, Harry does not need glasses. He has perfect vision. He can imagine clothes out of white mist. These are images of the capacity of the developed soul as it enters the presence of God with a right heart. Voldemort is in the same place, but these choices are not available to him. Recall that in their final duel, Harry tells Voldemort, "I've seen what you'll become, Tom. Try for some remorse." Voldemort chooses, in the face of all evidence of his own life's choices and Harry's constant victories over him, to assert his selfish desires at the expense of his eternal soul, or what remains of it. Fascinatingly, after Harry sees all this, he goes back into the world of the living, of muggles and of wizards and witches, to save the world for everyone. Life, death, and then life again. That's all for now. Let me wish you a long life with lots of good reading. Please join us in singing our final song, Freedom is Coming.
Oh freedom, oh freedom, oh freedom, freedom is coming. Oh freedom, oh freedom, oh freedom, freedom is coming. Oh freedom, freedom is coming. Freedom is coming. Freedom is coming. Oh yes, I know. Freedom is coming. Freedom is coming. Freedom is coming. Oh yes, I know. 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 Oh yes, I know.
words for the extinguishing of our chalice. We extinguish this chalice, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we hold in our hearts until we are together again. For our benediction this Easter service, let us hear the words of Lynn Unger and her poem, Pandemic. For some, it has become a mantra during this time. Pandemic. What if you thought of it as the Jews consider the Sabbath, the most sacred of times? Cease from travel. Cease from buying and selling. Give up, just for now, on trying to make the world different than it is. Sing. Pray. Touch only those to whom you commit your life. Center down. And when your body has become still, reach out with your heart. Know that we are connected in ways that are terrifying and beautiful. You could hardly deny it now. Know that our lives are in one another's hands. Surely that has come clear. Do not reach out your hands. Reach out your heart. Reach out your words. Reach out all the tendrils of compassion that move invisibly where we cannot touch. Promise this world your love, for better or for worse, in sickness and in health, for as long as we all shall live.
After a thorough and transformative search process grounded in your generous congregational input, we unanimously present the Reverend Linda Susan Ulrich for your consideration as our settled minister.
Reverend Linda Susan has created a short introductory video for us to share with you now.
Hi everyone, I'm Reverend Linda Susan Ulrich, and I'm absolutely delighted at the prospect of becoming your next settled minister. First, I hope you'll join me in expressing deep gratitude to your amazing search committee, who took your trust in them to heart and represented you beautifully. And I'd be saying that even if I weren't the candidate. We'll be working together over the next few weeks to map out what a virtual candidating period looks like. This isn't what any of us expected when the search process began, and we're kind of building the road as we travel it. The goal is to create an array of opportunities for you and I to engage with one another. Now, some of those more informal ways of connecting are going to be hard to replicate online, but my hope is that we can approach this candidating period with creativity and humor and compassion. My wife Emily and our son RJ are also super excited. We've already been brainstorming ideas of how you might be able to connect with them during candidating as well. Emily actually grew up in Connecticut and her family is there, so we're also very excited to be closer to them. I want to be clear though, while your location may have caught my eye initially, it's not why I said yes to being your candidate. I said yes because of how you live into your social justice commitments. I said yes because you care deeply about worship and music. I said yes because children and youth aren't an afterthought in the life of the congregation. I said yes because some years ago, my family and I came to Sunday services, and you welcomed us so warmly, and that has really stayed with me. I said yes because I think we can do amazing ministry together, building the beloved community, growing spiritually and in a sense of purpose, living out our Unitarian Universalist values, and working towards collective liberation. I look forward to getting to know each of you and to sharing more of who I am. So until then, I want to offer you a verse from one of my favorite sung blessings. May peace be with you. Peace be with you now. May peace be with you always. Peace be with you now and always. Thank you.
We're delighted to invite you to participate virtually during Candidating Week, April 27th through May 10th.
Keep an eye out for email and other communications from USNH, and visit our home on USNH website under About Us to stay in the know.